Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on what part of the country you are in today. I'd like to welcome all of you to this webinar that will provide you with an overview of CESMII's Smart Manufacturing Innovation Platform, as well as provide you with enough time today to actually go over some Q&A and a dialogue through our chat room. So thanks for joining us again. My name is Harish Malkani. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the CTO of CESMII, and I'm joined today by Jonathan Weiss, who's the VP of Technology and the Chief Architect of the platform. What you'll hear today mostly is just an overview of what the platform is, and our hope is that you actually had a chance to look at the video demonstration that was posted and released a few weeks ago. And the idea today is to give you a little bit more in terms of any questions that you might have that we can answer for you and provide any clarity that's required for that. So without any further delay, I'll just hand it over to Jonathan Weiss. Jonathan, all yours.
Thanks, Harish, and thanks everybody for participating today. I'm Jonathan Weiss. I've been with CESMII for almost a year now, working on this platform that we are putting together alongside our members. If you've been around for a while, you've probably seen a slide that looks like this, and we call it a Markitecture, since this is not an architecture diagram, but it does do a fairly good job of kind of highlighting some of the blocks that are in the vision of what we're trying to solve together. This is a big vision. There's a lot of different pieces here. And I find when you're tackling a problem, it's useful to break it down into smaller parts. So the video that Harish mentioned that hopefully you've all seen or at least skimmed through identified 3 problems that I want to review today. These, by no means is this all of the problems that we have in making manufacturing smarter, but I think these buckets kind of represent areas that are ripe for innovation and where we want to work alongside you as members to tackle some of these things. And that's been the subject of our most recent Wave 3 of RFP. Hopefully you've seen that, or if you haven't, after today you can go take a look, and if these are areas that you're passionate about, we would love to engage with you on potential projects. So the first problem that we identified in the demo is connectivity. At the lowest level in manufacturing, there are hundreds of protocols. We've more or less standard on a physical interface. In most applications, a connection that looks like Ethernet is suitable, although in some environments there's a modification to that. But speaking over that wire are a wide array of different protocols. And this is just the raw data. So just to get to the raw data, we have to be able to speak multiple languages. And there are solutions out there for it. Some of them are expensive, some of them are proprietary, some of them are tied to an ecosystem. The one that we highlighted as having the most potential from our perspective is OPC. And in the previous version of OPC, that's been around a very long time, it did help solve this interface problem. The new version of OPC UA, something that we are proponents of, that we're working very closely with the OPC Foundation on, can help solve this problem as well. But it doesn't change the reality that there's a legacy out there that's speaking many different languages. Each of these things is evolving in its own kind of trajectory. They're not going away. In fact, they're getting better. But we have to be able to talk to all of them, and we have to be able to do so in a cost-effective way that doesn't tie manufacturers down to either an expensive solution or a silo that they can't break out of later. The second problem that we think exists, the second bucket of problems really, is the fact that when we want to build value on top of that raw data, we need to organize that data. And the organization that we can programmatically reflect on, the organization we can automatically see and extract, is based on a different kind of model. It grew up, it evolved out of electromechanical engineering. and it's not a programmer's interface in the traditional sense. So when we bring the IT and the OT worlds together, and we have these two skill sets, one that is very good at building logical systems, and one that is used to building against an object-oriented programming model, there's an impedance mismatch here. And what we've done as an industry to solve that is we've layered object models on top of the ladder logic, on top of the tags of data. But those are after the fact object models, and the burden is on an integrator or the end customer to try to reconstruct reality into an often proprietary object model. So we've moved the problem up a layer, but we're still creating silos. We still have object models, one that may not necessarily reflect reality, may not encompass the data necessary to solve the problem, and two, maybe another vendor lock-in, may take you down a path that you can't move off of in the future if you need to solve a different problem. The third kind of bucket of issues that we want to tackle together is this notion that if we put all the data into a data warehouse, a magical artificial intelligence is going to solve the problems for us. I am a proponent of machine learning. I'm very proud of a product I worked on in manufacturing that was an AI for manufacturing. But the fact remains that if you're going to train a machine learning algorithm, you need good features and labels on your data. And if your data lake contains a wide variety of temperature values that all share the same label, you don't have much hope of solving a temperature problem or an energy problem, no matter how great your AI is. So we can't just skip these other layers and shove the data up there and hope that magic appears to solve problems for us. We need to do this in a way that preserves the structure and the context of the data, that makes it easy to get at the data, and then we can begin innovating against good labeled data. So like I said, these problems have been solved. It's not that we can't solve them. They haven't been solved in a way that is missing the two challenges. One, either high cost, or two, vendor lock-in. We think that we are poised as an industry to move past that sort of adolescence. The standards that are evolving are moving in the right directions. And as a membership, if we can work together with these standards bodies, with software vendors, with suppliers, and kind of champion these causes, we can solve these problems once and for all, and we can finally reach the Industry 4.0 or whatever we want to call the next horizon. So that was sort of the groups of problems that we wanted to talk about. And then the video shows a demo of how the current state of the platform can be leveraged to begin to solve some of those problems. So our agenda today is similar to the video, but I promise there'll be a lot less slides and we can dive into questions. The thread that runs through all three of these buckets of problems, and indeed all three major layers of our architecture, is something that we call profiles. And we can go into depth on profiles if the questions go in that direction, but think of profiles as the glue that stitches each layer together. At the bottom, the profile translates or provides a mechanism to translate between protocols. At the middle layer, the profile brings structure to the data. It is the class definition, and it's based on OPC UA. We're not reinventing the wheel here. And then at the top layer, the profile is the programmer's interface. It is the contract that the platform promises to present to application developers. So if they build against that profile, they can be confident their app can be redeployed anywhere that profile exists. So we took these concepts, we took the current state of the platform, which candidly is still evolving, and we brought it all together at our brand new Smart Manufacturing Innovation Center. This is the first, but not the last, of these really cool opportunities for us to work with academia, to work with industry, to identify facilities where we can prove these ideas out and provide access for the membership to learn about what's happening, to test these ideas with us, and to provide feedback. So in preparing for the annual meeting, we rolled out the platform. There's a small bit of on-premise code that needs to run. and then most of the technology is in the cloud. There's a secure connection between the two, and we deployed this against a real-world manufacturing facility at North Carolina State University. We used their biotechnology facility. There's 2 other facilities that we're bringing online as well. We installed the connector against their data source, which in this case was an OSI Pi historian connected to a system that was made up of equipment from a variety of vendors. We started that data streaming into the platform. We exposed that data through a secure GraphQL endpoint, and then we brought member technologies in to connect to that API and offer their unique value on top of the data. So this was a pretty exciting opportunity, 1, to build out a cool demo, but 2, to really test out these ideas. And this is a bit of an eye chart, but if you've seen the video, you've seen this. There were sort of 3 different silos to the demo. 1 with a traditional kind of flow from top to bottom, very much like what many stovepipe systems look like. Another was what I called an orthogonal data source, where a technology had its own data collection mechanism, its own cloud, and we synchronized the data across the 2. And then the third was a project I was really proud of that I worked on with my son, where we took a cheap Raspberry Pi, and we didn't go to North Carolina. We just connected it to our fridge, but we streamed the data in through the Microsoft Azure platform and into our platform. So our platform is an application platform. Theirs is a cloud platform, but they both have their own connectivity, and we want to support what people are using. So we tested this theory as well. And if a 13-year-old boy can connect the data source and turn it into value, we're confident any of you can as well. So the cleaner version of the architecture, the goal that we're moving towards has a lot less lines in it, because we want you to add the bubbles and arrows. We want your unique value to be built on top of the platform. We don't want you to have to worry about how you're going to talk to a variety of different vendors' equipment. We want to provide a solid, secure, easy to understand endpoint based on strongly typed structured data that you can rely on to create your value, to solve problems in manufacturing. So that's it for Slideware. Like I said, most of this time today is going to be Q&A. To the extent that you are ready to begin integrating, so are we. We want to hear from you. We want to make sure we're headed in the right direction. And if you have any questions, now would be a great time to try to tackle them. If I can't answer them today, we'll get you the answers.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that great overview. So we have a Q&A tab on your Zoom session, as well as a chat room available for you to enter your questions, and we'll be happy to take those now. While they're filling in the questions on that tab, Jonathan, could you maybe just take a moment and talk about how we are embracing some of the connectivity standards? Like, you know, there's a mention of OPC UA and some future interactions that we expect to have with MT Connect and MQTT and other standards that are already out there. Could you perhaps comment on that?
Yeah. A couple thoughts on that. So first of all, I tend to simplify the problem by bucketing a standard either into comms, so this is a protocol, or something higher level. We generally are going to sit higher level. We want to turn data into structured data. So if a standard is for communications, if it's a transport level standard, we want to support it. And in fact, in RFP2 Wave 3, we've explicitly solicited projects to help us adapt to existing standards. When you move up a layer, which is where OPC UA sits and MT Connect kind of sits between the two, it's less about adapting to, and it's more about embracing a structure that already exists. So OPC UA can be used to articulate almost any structure. For that reason, we've selected OPC UA as the thing that will structure our profiles. MT Connect has an OPC companion spec where the MT Connect structure can be expressed in OPC UA. So that should lend itself directly to an MT Connect profile, where if a system has implemented MT Connect, we'll be able to automatically bind a profile to that using the companion spec and immediately pull structured data out of the MT Connect system. As we kind of investigate each of these standards, right now they go one of two ways in my mind. Either it's a protocol and we 100% want to support it. It's just a question of order of solve. What's the relative priority for that one? If it's a standard that brings structure to data, our first position would be, can we reflect that structure right through to our API? And so far, that set of theories is holding up.
Great, great. There is a question in the Q&A box. So by the way, if you have the opportunity, please use the Q&A box so that we can actually track the questions and answers for our recording purposes. That's a better tab to use. There's a question out there that says, what is the platform from a technology standpoint? Like, what's in that box?
The platform really has 3 layers. The first layer we call the SM Edge, or sometimes the connector. That is the component that gets deployed within the manufacturing facility. So that's often drawn as the bottom of the architecture. That piece needs to sit in a DMZ or in a bridge zone where it can both reach the OT system that has the data and the platform running in the cloud. That connection going from the connector to the cloud is 2-way encrypted. There's a certificate exchange in both directions from the client to the server. So it's a secure connection. It can also be a whitelisted connection. If there's only one endpoint that you want to allow to go out, we can identify the endpoint in the port so that you can make the firewall rules. But as of right now, the core platform runs in the cloud, and we need that connectivity. The core platform then is the part that holds the data structure, holds the type system. It is the enforcer of the profile structure. And then the third piece, which is kind of the line going out of the core platform, is the API. We've chosen to invest in a GraphQL API because the database that we store is a graph database. So they marry very well to each other. The platform is going to do things like securing that, issuing tokens for application developers. But the API really is the third part. It's GraphQL and OPC UA effectively, and allows application developers to build against that. Application developers then are in the demo I talked about the healthy tree. The applications, the predictive algorithms, the new visualizations, the mobile tool, anything that depends on that data is the fruit, is the result of this platform.
Yeah, very good. Another question is around testing and deployment, and you know, I'll summarize that briefly. That I think when we talk about deploying these types of technologies, there's always a tendency to go just do it without having fully tested it and vetted it out and tried it and all that stuff. So what is CESMII's role in that deployment phase from a platform standpoint? Yeah,
so that's going to evolve over time. And I see a similar question. How do I get the platform? Once I have the platform, how do I deploy it? The piece that needs to be deployed is the connector. That's an installer that has to run on-prem that currently runs on Windows. We are looking to make that multi-platform. So CESMII doesn't have the resources to go to every premise. The tools to get the connector against an instance of the platform are quite easy, and we can certainly support that remotely. The platform itself is a multi-tenant Kubernetes cluster that we administer. At this point, the way to get an instance of that platform would be to talk to us. I think info@CESMII, and that would be probably routed to me or someone on the technical team with the use case, and we can spin up an instance that is unique to you. There's costs associated with that, so we're not just going to spin them up willy-nilly. But certainly, if there's a valid use case, or if it's for an approved project, we'll be able to create those sort of on demand and help with the on-prem installation. Once the instance is spun up and data is moving from the connector, it's just a web interface, both programmatically. GraphQL is a REST style interface in that you need an HTTPS client, and the user interface is web-based as well.
Great, great. I think in a lot of these questions and answers, if you have a need to kind of go back to a particular slide that articulates that, we will certainly do that. There's another question in here that says, could we walk through an example where the platform enables a manufacturer to lower their energy use by 10 to 15%. This is, I guess, it's sort of tied to use cases and you know, how we leverage the platform to actually enable that.
Yeah, so the platform's job is to get that energy data flowing so that that can be analyzed. The platform's job is not to analyze the problem. That is where the marketplace and the apps come in. That's the kinds of projects that we want to see happen against the platform. We want you as a membership to identify the problems to solve. We as the folks working on the platform want to ensure that that's easy for you to solve by getting the data flowing and into a structure and making it available in a reliable API.
Yeah, so I think one example might be that, you know, we have several projects that are going on in the Institute where, you know, there are folks that are focused on developing, say, a predictive algorithm or a model that predicts the behavior of the process. That would be an example of an application that resides on our app layer in the platform. And the solution set is made up of these applications, but then it's enabled by the platform because the data is flowing through your processes into the platform. And then at some point, you want to take that data and eventually make it available for applications that are actually acting on that data to make your processes better. So that's how the energy use case would be kind of developed. And so the platform is critical in movement of information.
Right. That's definitely the first part of it, is the movement of the information to the application developer. But and that's smart. If an application developer can solve that problem, that's smart manufacturing. But when we really get smart as an industry, as a nation, is when that solution that was developed for one particular customer or end user, when that can be redeployed easily to anyone that has a similar problem, then innovation can multiply. And the way that we envision that happening is, you as an application developer, once you've identified the data you need to solve that problem, you articulate that as a profile. That profile then can be fetched by any other instance of the platform. Our goal is that if the data exists, it can be automatically fulfilled. That's a journey. That's going to take a while. But anybody who can bind that profile to the data in their operation can then fulfill that profile. The platform will meet the promise, and the application can run against it. So it lets you scale the deployment of your problem solving across the country at a much faster rate than if every time you wanted to deploy that app, you had to build the entire infrastructure and wire it in manually.
Good point. Good point. The next one is a fairly quick one. The Wave 3 and Wave 4. Wave 3 is the platform capabilities, and Wave 4 is the innovation projects. That is correct.
Yeah, so the way to think of it in those three layers that we talked about, the collection of data, the structuring of data, and then the use of the data. Wave 4 is the use of the data. Let's get lots of these apps up here using the data and solving problems. Wave 3 is the other two layers, structuring the data, adding capabilities to the platform, getting access to more types of data over more protocols.
Good. Okay, next one is we showed the profile at 3 layers. Was that the same profile, or there are flavors of profiles for different layers and different problems?
The profile specification that we're working on with the working team is a multi-part specification. Part 1 is the structure of the data. It's the class definition or type definition. Part 2, the chunk we want to bite off next, is the layer below, is the adapting to different protocols.
Right.
So it's the same profile. Profiles are designed to be, sorry, I got distracted by another good question that came in. Profiles are designed to be built in fragments and assembled together. So one person could build the structure, the class definition, and it may be an idealized statement. This is the data that I would like to have for my app. Another person can then build the part that binds to the brown field, that binds to the different protocols. And there can be multiples of those. So I as a profile developer, I could build the binding for a Rockwell system. And then another developer could come along and say, I can bind that to a Siemens system. And so then the super profile that gets automatically constructed by the profile contains the common structure, but the 2 different binding capabilities. And that's the power of crowdsourcing here. We're not looking for one person to build one giant monolithic profile, although that could happen. We instead want to see people bringing their areas of expertise, and the platform will kind of on the fly put them together to fit the different scenario.
So I think you touched upon this next one a little bit earlier, but how does a CESMII member get a hold of the platform, and how would you go about deploying it? Is there a documentation and guide available to do that, or how does that happen in the short term versus midterm?
Yeah, so the shortest answer is email us with your use case and requirements, and it'll be a white glove treatment where we work with you to roll it out. As the platform matures, as we approach 1.0 and build up the other requirements for a platform like documentation and deployment guides, that'll become more hands-off and more self-serve. But for now, let us be your guide.
There is a question around the challenge that we might face in sort of deploying these profiles across multiple locations, multiple brownfield locations in particular. Any thoughts on how that would happen?
So many. So when we're looking at a brownfield, we have an array of problems, and we have to solve them all. And the platform can't do them all magically. The first problem in a truly brownfield is that we may not have connectivity. That operation might not be networked. There's really 2 ways through that journey. One is an integration project to begin networking the operation and potentially modernizing it. And that's a valid path that I think some manufacturers need to start that journey sooner rather than later. And I know that there are companies that would love to help them on that journey. Some of them are members. Some of them are former employers. The other alternative, though, is we called it self-serve smart manufacturing, but it's not appropriate in every scenario. But it's to do the 13-year-old boy project. Sensors, industrialized sensors are expensive because they're ruggedized, but there's a lot that you can do with a Wi-Fi connected weigh scale or some relatively low cost optical sensors and a Raspberry Pi or some other low cost equipment. And there are vendors selling ruggedized Raspberry Pis at significantly lower cost. That can be a step on the journey that can begin to give those brownfields some of the value of connectivity at a very low cost and kind of start them on that journey. So that's problem number one. If we need to get plugged in, figuring out how to get plugged in. Problem number two is if you're already plugged in, or if you have a system with some level of connectivity, but as a brownfield, perhaps they're older machines, perhaps the OEM is no longer supporting those machines. I actually think there's power in that brownfield, because to the extent that those machines exist and there are other people using them, or to the extent that these processes are well understood and have been around a long time, the marketplace can address those issues. Once you build a profile for a brownfield machine once, you can redeploy that profile. You may have to address the protocol problem, but again, we can address that with the marketplace. Once you build the binding layer for a particular protocol, you can reuse that binding layer. And the goal of the platform is to assemble both the class definition and the appropriate binding layer repeatedly and on demand. So brownfields are actually powerful if we pass the connectivity problem, because they are likely to be repeated, because they are likely to exist out there. We will also in a brownfield have an issue where it's a unique machine and it's not repeated. And so hopefully the tools that we're building for developers make it easier to solve those problems as a one-off, and retain in that approach a vendor agnostic result where you aren't locked into a single ecosystem because you chose that one to solve, your one unique machine or one unique process brownfield problem. And we could probably go on and just have a discussion on kind of building up the layers and solving the problems, but I think we get a good return on investment by addressing those problems in the brownfield.
This sort of goes back to one of the earlier questions. It'd be good to have an architecture presentation available for members to access, particularly for the API that's based on GraphQL, and what's the actual definition of the connector, what's involved there, and so on. So when do we expect to have some of that available for our members? And if you can maybe comment on that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Those would be useful resources. Most of the last couple months of my life we're building out this demo and getting to this kind of point in the evolution of the platform. By the time we hit 1.0, I don't think we can call ourselves a 1.0 if we don't have some documentation. But realistically, it's probably still a couple months out. Like I said, we'll hand curate for now. We'll hand walk folks through this. The GraphQL API is approaching stability, but it's still evolving a lot. So the task of writing documentation would be a repeated one at this point. But as we get stable, as we approach 1.0, we'll begin working on and publishing those things. And I 100% agree they'll be useful. Until then, I'll be the buffer. The tech team here will support you.
Just be nice to Jonathan. That's what I would say. Great question here. Can data be diverted to different use cases through the platform? For example, publish for 3 uses: energy analysis, predictive maintenance, and quality control purposes.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I thought the question would be a little bit different based on the diverted. I think in that scenario, we're not actually diverting data. We're identifying 3 different sets of data that all coalesce in the same platform, and then have different apps or different value creators. The third layer has different parts using that data. But our perspective, all the data should be available in the same interface, regardless of the end use case, because you might not know the hidden relationships in those groups of data.
Yeah. Jonathan, in terms of so this question kind of begged another question that was asked before, and it's been sort of, as we've had the conversation, it might be important to say, is that, we talk about the profiles that would be developed and would exist in the marketplace for multiple use. Could you walk us through um, like how does a member, or how are these profiles developed in the first place, and how does an application vendor come in and interact with those profiles in a use case?
One of the things that we are lacking is an independent tool set for developing profiles. Right now, you can define types within the platform, within your instance of the platform, but they are stuck in your instance of the platform, so they can't be exported and reproduced. We are working on that tooling. We're working on the import-export mechanism to support that. When will those be available is something we were just talking about today, Haresh, and I don't know yet. But again, that's something we can help with. It would just be nice if there were automated tools for it, and we just haven't reached that level of maturity yet. It can be done, just not in as automated way as I would like us to be at.
Yeah. Now, in terms, if you're an app developer, and you want your application to be in this platform and in the marketplace, what guidance would you have for them? Like, what are the steps necessary to do that?
Yeah, there's really two things that we've been guiding projects towards so far, and would continue to be good guidance. One, the platform is not going to provide kind of the execution platform. We are not trying to be a cloud infrastructure vendor. So the execution platform you want to run on, whether it's AWS or Azure or a Box Energy or Desk, that's really up to you. But our guidance based on sort of industry trends and on how the platform itself is architected is if you can take that workload and containerize it, it's going to be easier for you to move it between execution platforms. And if that workload ever should become a core part of the platform, or if it needs to run in the same cluster as the platform for performance reasons, a container is the best kind of hope of those things. So to the extent that you're making a black box, if that black box can be in a container, I think that is going to be useful to you and to our evolution together. The other thing is, as you identify your inputs and outputs, you write a cool algorithm that predicts energy consumption or makes recommendations on how to reduce energy consumption by 15%. You are taking in data. Yeah, your function takes inputs, and you are returning a value. You have outputs. That's the heart of the profile. That's the type definition, the data that you need going in and the data that you're going to present going out. Until we have tools, which hopefully isn't too far away, until we have tools, if you can just capture that in almost any structure, a C# class definition, an OPC UA information model would be great because that's the direction we're heading in, or a CSV file that identifies the inputs and outputs. That's a great start towards a profile. It's actually not going to be much harder than that to build the first layer of the profile, the class definition. The second problem is harder. That's the binding, the protocol binding. And again, to the extent that you identify patterns, if you're solving a problem and the end user you're solving that problem for has implemented CESMII Energy, the Common Industrial Protocol energy definition, then identify the members of the CESMII Energy object that you're using as inputs, and you have your binding layer. You have your binding layer for one protocol, but you have both parts of the profile. And it's on us to get tooling so that you can express that in a programmatically repeatable fashion. But just have the discipline as you're going through your project to capture this information in some structure. And again, you'll be with us. You'll be on the right direction. The tendency to just virtually run wires between a tag value and directly to an attribute or property in your class definition, that'll solve the problem, But if you just take one step out in abstraction and build a separate class and identify your inputs and outputs, you're with us. That's the way to evolve with us.
Great. Well, this is sort of a part B of that side of the story. Like, if you're a manufacturer, how can you participate in the development of profiles, for example, or even the applications? What would you say there?
That question probably encompasses more than just technology, but there's definitely a couple things that I can think of, and maybe you can add to this, Haresh. One is our Wave 4 projects are looking for manufacturers who have a problem that want to either assemble a team or participate in a team that is trying to solve that problem in a repeatable fashion, in a way that produces a profile and something like an app. So that would be great to get on a project team. Another great thing that you can do is begin to influence your suppliers to follow some of these patterns, these good behaviors of identifying the structures of data and articulating them separately in a repeatable fashion, rather than just custom solving this one thing you ask them to do. Get them to think about how they could express that using a standard like OPC UA, so that it can be repeatable, so that it may not be in your immediate interest to help the entire industry, but if we can all follow some of these behaviors that exist in technologies like the internet, where we build reflectable interfaces that another person can come along and add value to that, I think that would be awesome if manufacturers were with us in beginning to demand that of their suppliers and system integrators.
Exactly. Yeah. These are all great questions. Keep them coming. We are loving it. One question here is around workflows. So how can we access profiles to build workflows dynamically? That's a very deep question.
A couple of things. I don't think I can fully answer the question, but let me put out a couple bullets. So first of all, the workflow engine that's a part of our platform, that's provided by Savagent, is more or less profile aware. The demo was built using the Savagent workflow engine against the GraphQL API that presents the profile objects over that API. So workflows can be built against profiles today. Now, those are not automatic workflows, which I agree would be amazing. One of the things that Savagent brings to the table for the membership is a library of existing workflows and workflow steps that they have used to solve problems for their customers. So that library of pieces and pre-solved problems probably doesn't go all the way to dynamically and automatically detecting what you're trying to do and building a workflow for it, but it's certainly, combined with the type interface, makes it much easier to begin snapping those things together and orchestrating solutions via workflow.
Yeah, I think there is in one of the things that you've taught me earlier on, you had mentioned that part of the profile could be data sets that would be used to activate certain actions, right, in the workflow, and that would be another connecting point for sort of making it dynamic in a way. So.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about that yet in sort of the evolution of profiles, but in object-oriented programming, the members of an object include the properties, which is pretty much where we're at right now in the profile definition, the functions, the things the object can do, and the events. The events are fired when something happens to the object. And functions and events are very useful in workflows. In fact, workflows run off of that. We're not there yet in the evolution of profiles, but OPC UA is there in the evolution of the information model. And maybe the next demo, we can show all of that happening magically.
Yeah. So another question that came up here that deals with sort of interaction between applications that could potentially be using profiles. And it says, where do outputs from applications that do the analysis go? Are they routed back to the data are they routed back in as a data source? Does the output then have its own profile? Then other apps can subscribe to that.
This is a great question because I love to nerd out about the potential here. So let's take the simple case. The application developer built the profile and has already identified that a value is an output that will be returned by their application. So when the profile is implemented, that member, that attribute or property is an empty stub until the application runs and populates it. What's even more exciting is the possibility that because all profiles are fragments, the application developer uses a profile somebody else has built, but then adds a fragment that adds a new member or multiple new members to that original object. So we call this polymorphism. And it would allow an application to, once it receives the object and its data, morph that object into something else that has additional values in it. And what's powerful about that is multiple application developers could work against the base object. But one that presents back a profile that says, this is now a new object, we preserve the original object in the graph, but we also present this new compound object that contains the additional information. And then new application vendors can come along and build against the compound object. And the original application developers who only knew about the base object continue to work. The thing can evolve as people mutate, is the term in GraphQL, as they change and enhance the objects through the value they put back in the platform.
That's great. So we don't have any more questions on the Q&A box here, but Jonathan, one of the things that has been asked before is that, as we make progress towards fleshing out our marketplace, with profiles and applications, could you comment on how we would handle the use of those profiles and applications in a licensed fashion? For example, if you're a vendor trying to be part of the marketplace, how does the transaction work between the vendor and CESMII and between CESMII and the members who are using it? And again, I know that there's a short-term versus long-term answer to that. So maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, the long-term answer is that the marketplace, it's part of our sustainability plan that the marketplace is a money-making venture for us and for those who publish things to it. So that means as people get value out of the profiles and apps, they contribute back monetary value. The short-term answer, though, is right now we just want to get solutions out there. We're not going to perform the transactions. We're not going to be taking a cut. We just want good solutions exposed to the members and to the rest of the nation, as this is a best in class. We're championing this, and we want people to be aware of it. We'll evolve from point A to point B together with the membership, where we're not doing this unilaterally. We'll make sure it makes sense for everyone as it grows.
Great. Well, I think this has been a great discussion. Thank you, Jonathan, for answering all the questions. I would not have done that, or not be able to do that. But keep, if you have any additional questions that did not get answered and you still like to ask, send us that communication via email. We'll be happy to address them. I believe this webinar is being recorded and will be posted along with the Q&A that we just had. So you'll have an opportunity to go back and listen in again. I wanted to thank Jonathan, obviously, to run the show here, and for all of you to participate today, because I think it's through the Q&A sessions that we also get to understand what are the needs out there and how we can best address them going forward. So thank you for doing that. And with that, we'll close off this session. Have a good rest of the day, wherever you are, and be safe.
Thanks for the great questions, everyone.